Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are at. My name is Mark Powers, and welcome to Getting to and Rocking the TEDx stage. I'm excited to facilitate and moderate this panel discussion between four awesome friends of mine who all also happen to be current or past TEDx event coordinators. And this is going to be a lot of fun. As most people who are watching us probably know, TED, TED, is an organization whose acronym means Technology, Entertainment, Design. And they feature all sorts of videos that promote ideas worth spreading. All of us have watched a gazillion different TED Talks online. And TEDx events are smaller, often regional events that are sometimes focused around a little bit more of a theme than maybe just the larger TED events are. And on top of that, there are TEDx salons as well, which could be even smaller gatherings and have super focused topics from event to event. So we have four guest speakers today, and I'll introduce each of them in turn. But myself, I wanted to explain why a TEDx talk. I am currently in Toastmasters at Wake Up Beaverton Toastmasters in Beaverton, Oregon. And as I'm working through that, I found that many of us want to be presenting on a TEDx stage at some point. And it's an opportunity that I've gotten to have myself a few times in the past. And the first of those was in 2012 when one of our guests, Michelle Jones, invited me to speak at TEDx Concordia U Portland. And Michelle was at that time coordinating that event and has coordinated events in the Portland area for 10 years. She put on TEDx Puget Sound up in Washington, and then TEDx Concordia U Portland, which eventually was rebranded to TEDx Mount Hood. And she's also attended lots of TED Active events up in Whistler, as well as the TEDx Summit in Doha. And on top of that, she's also done her own TEDx talk at TEDxSalem, where two of our other guests are co-curators, and that it was called How to Do College Better in 2019, I believe. Did that one? And that was my first experience speaking on a stage of that nature, and incredible experience. After that, amazingly, I got asked to start being the onstage host for that TEDx Concordia U and then TEDx Mount Hood event for a couple of years. So 13, 14, 15, I was the onstage host, and then have also been the onstage host for several of the smaller salons that I mentioned earlier. From there, I ended up meeting Brian Smith, one of the two Brians that we have featured today, and he was at that time curating TEDxOmaha as well as TEDx Youth Omaha, where I performed and played in 2014. So he was involved with TEDxOmaha for 8 years between 2010 and 2017, has also attended multiple TED Active events and as coach speakers in the US, Canada, Uganda. It's kind of all over the place. So it was a lot of fun getting to participate at that event because I was not only speaking, but also got to bring some drumming into the event, which is the thing that I do for my career. So it was great to kind of mix the two. Later on, I ended up being asked to be the onstage host at TEDxSalem, where both Carlee Wright and Brian Hart, our other two guests, have been co-curating for 7 years, and they also have been TED Active attendees. So all four of these guests have multiple years experience running these events and running teams who put them together well. I've gotten to see the behind the scenes with every single one of these teams, and it's really amazing watching it happen. So what we're going to do this morning is start off with a few questions that I'm going to ask all four panelists. And we'll just kind of have a little roundtable discussion and let everybody answer a couple of questions. And then we'll open it up to Q&A from any attendees. So if you have a question, there is a little button you can hit that says Q&A, and you can click on that, pipe in a question. You can also upvote other attendees' questions, anything that you really would like to hear answered. And those can be directed to all four of our guests or to one guest in particular. So feel free to put somebody's name in there if you'd like it to go to somebody in particular. We are going to start off with Michelle Jones, the first of the TEDx organizers who I met. And I would like to ask all of you, beginning with Michelle, how your speakers are chosen. And what I mean by that is the process that your team has gone through in the past in order to find speakers, in order to whittle down speakers. Maybe it's curated, maybe there is an application process. Every event ends up being a little different, so walk us through that. And then how do you choose who is going to end up speaking on your stage? Take it away, Michelle.
Yeah. Wow. Thanks, Mark, for this opportunity. And I feel like with everything that's been going on and with my primary day job, I haven't lately had lots of time to think about TEDx. So this is also just sort of a fun way to get my brain and emotions back into the land of TEDx. So that's fun. Yeah, we have a pretty great planning team. All TEDx planning teams are all volunteer. So everything that I'm going to describe is done by a team of somewhere around a dozen, sometimes a little more, sometimes a little less volunteers. And we volunteer year round. So it takes us 10 or 11 months to plan an annual event. Our process has been described, and it's been this way from the beginning for all 10 years, as frustratingly democratic. So we vote on everything, and everybody makes decisions all together as a team. I don't think that would work for all teams. I don't necessarily recommend it, but it works for us, and it's what attracts people to joining our team. And we often have a lot of young adults, college students typically, from Concordia, Portland when I taught there, and now from Wayfinding Academy. So I think it's fun for young adults to get that experience of testing out their voice and seeing how their voice matters in a planning process and then shows up on stage, 10 months later or something. So we do take nominations. We always have sort of an open Google form for nominations, and folks can nominate other people to be speakers, or they can nominate themselves to be speakers. Since we're located in Portland, Oregon, we have a fairly large urban population, like if you take the whole Portland metro area. So we tend to get, on average, each year somewhere in the neighborhood of 100 to 150 nominations, some of which are duplicates. I don't think that would be true in every setting, because I think it depends on where you're at and how many folks you've got, but that's how it looks for us. And there's always repeats year over year over year. And we do hold over the ones from the year before who we didn't invite and bring them back into the process. And so we take that list and we remove duplicates. We look for any people who we would rule out automatically, which tends to be people who don't live in the Portland area, because there's now TEDx's all over the world. And the goal of the TEDx program is to focus on your local community and local ideas worth spreading and voices to amplify. So we rule out folks that are not in the in the Portland metro area. And we also tend to rule out, and I don't think that all TEDx events do this or should do this, but we tend to rule out people who have given a TEDx talk before. So we're trying to find first-time voices with an idea worth spreading. And then once we've narrowed that down to, tends to be somewhere between 60 and 70 folks, the whole team researches all of those people and votes on it. And then we get a smaller list, and then we take that list to our team and we have a conversation. And that conversation is focused on mostly trying to find a diverse set of speakers, both in terms of the identity of the speaker, but also in terms of the topics that they'll talk about. Usually around that same time, we're choosing a theme for our event, but we kind of loosely hold the idea of the theme as we select speakers. We don't necessarily try to force that to fit together. The main thing we're looking for is an idea worth spreading and a diverse roster of speakers in terms of topic and content and what they represent across the board. And once we get to a list of somewhere around a dozen to 15 folks, we start making asks. And we usually, in our case, we usually make one round of asks and then see how that plays out. And then based on who says yes and no, we then hold and make our second round of asks. For example, one year we had, in our first round of asks, all of the people who identify as male who we asked said yes. and almost all of the people who identify as female declined our invitation. And so then we knew that for the second round, we needed to shift that so that we had a representative group on stage when the day came. So we do 2 batches of asks. So for us, it looks like that. That whole process tends to take us about 2 months because of all the frustrating democracy and voting and conversation and all of that. I don't think that's necessary for all teams, but again, that works for us. And our favorite types of speakers are the ones that are nominated by other TEDxMtHood speakers who have spoken in the past. So we always reach out to our alumni speaker community and ask them to nominate people that they know, because those folks know what it takes to make it all the way through the process. So when they make a nomination, they're doing it with all of that knowledge, which we find helps a lot along the way. So that's how we do it over here.
Very cool. Thank you. Very, very, very democratic for sure.
Maybe a little too much so, but it's fun.
Absolutely. That's awesome. Very cool. So the next person we'll have answer that question would be Brian Smith, being the second TEDx organizer that I worked with. And Brian, how had you done things in the past with TEDx Omaha? And I'm also curious about TEDx Youth Omaha. If there's any.
Yeah, so go ahead. So we essentially what we did is stumbled through what worked and didn't work until we found out enough of what worked. So I'm actually going to share a link here. What we ended up doing over time is developed a page on our website, how to speak at TEDx Omaha. Essentially what we ended up doing is I would just, I had a kind of a running list of people in our community who were doing amazing things, but also had an ability to speak about it that got other people excited. And then throughout the year, whenever I met somebody, I would have a conversation about TEDx and say, hey, who do you know? Who do you know that's doing something that we should all know about? And then we also did a call for speakers, kind of a public open call for speakers. One of the things that we noticed the same way that Michelle did is that we had to be very intentional about inviting people to put themselves in consideration. TED itself has had this same issue where I think it was the curators said, look, we basically have to spend twice the amount of effort finding half of the women speakers, because men are always looking for attention, and the women are not. A lot of the times women will respond that they're not quite ready yet. So we have to have that conversation and encourage them and let them know that they are ready. There's a lot of support behind the TEDx community and what we want to see. So essentially what we would do though throughout the years, we kind of have this running list that we would put together. So we're looking for generally people from our area or who have a strong connection to our area. Mark happened to be at living in Omaha at the time, and so that was easy. Sometimes we have I would also qualify from various organizations. So we have several art organizations, some of whom who have a residency program. So I would get people from the residency program to speak at our event, because we just happen to have them living in Omaha for a good portion of time, for a year. Other times I would go to organizations like our medical center, and I had a connection there, and I would ask her to give me some recommendations. The one that was always most interesting was to see who kind of nominated themselves, that call for speakers, who came out to pitch themselves essentially. And that was one of the things that was gave us some wild cards, gave us some groups of types of people that we really didn't want on our stage, especially a lot of the people who are self-promoting, the people who are really looking for how do I get attention for my consulting business, or how do I get attention for my book, things of that nature. But we would have essentially what we would do also is before we did all this call for speakers, is we would put out the theme for the year. And so that helped our potential speakers kind of guide in what they were going to talk about. Obviously, we're looking for diversity in topics in particular, but we're also looking for that conversation of how do we take all these ideas and weave them together and kind of give us an opportunity to figure out who has similar ideas, but maybe how do we amplify some voices that we haven't heard before.
Very cool. That's awesome. I think that the fact that you are also running the youth events is very, very cool, and that's something that, having gotten to experience the youth side just in Omaha anyway, was very powerful for me, because it's really promoting these ideas worth spreading to a whole group of kids who might not otherwise be getting the links from their peers, and kind of getting sucked into this world and just being fed a lot of really great information and really interesting ideas. So kudos to you for doing that.
Yeah, and one more quick thing too with the youth event. Um, my goal with that was really to assemble a group of young people to put together, especially for the second year that we did it, and basically advise them, not run the show, but let them figure out how they're going to attract speakers, how they're going to train speakers, how they're going to select who goes on stage, because to me that really was an opportunity for them to make all the decisions and to craft this thing to what they really wanted it to be.
That's very cool. I love it. Awesome. The next two co-curators who I got to work with were Carlee Wright and Brian Hart. So I'm going to pass this one to you both, and since your answers might overlap quite a bit, because the process obviously was the same because you're both intertwined, feel free to pass things back and forth a bit. But what did your speaker process, or what has it looked like in the past?
So we actually do our speakers by an open application. So we put it out there that it is open to local, but we're not limited. We actually go national as well, with the idea of highlighting local voices with a couple of ideas from outside the area for the local people to learn about as well. Part of our process and a big thing with it was that although our application asks a lot of questions, like name and location and idea, we actually have a team member who strips it down and would just present to our speaker committee. That is just the idea, the general summary of the idea, and the title of the talk. So as our team looks at it, we are truly looking at the talks on just how the idea is pitched. And then we narrow down from those ideas. We would boil it down to the ones that we're interested in. Again, democracy on our end here too. Our team all had a say in kind of a vote of like what ones they really liked for ideas, or what they wanted to hear more about. And then we would go through, like, they could kind of pitch for whatever that idea was. And then we opened it and looked at other points, if there was two ideas that were similar, or we were only able to narrow it down to like 20, then we'd look at it and go, okay, well, what area are these people from? And then, because there are logistics of getting them there, or if they are local voices, and if there's two people with a talk that could be on a similar subject, we would like to highlight the local voice first. And then also with Brian and I, we both have jobs that would lend us to a lot of different people that we meet. And so sometimes we were handpicking people when we came across them. It was that, hey, you've got a really cool idea or subject, or just what they do in their daily lives, that we thought, hey, maybe you have a TED talk, and like, let's discuss just on the general, like, let's meet and see what you have to say. And then, after Brian and I would talk, we would say like, hey, do we think this person has a talk? Do we want to talk to them about cultivating something? So Brian, I'm sure you've got stuff to add.
Yeah, I think you covered a lot of it. One thing, I just love how similar and how different all of these TEDx is organized. It's affirming and also interesting to me that we're doing things very similar but also different, which is very cool. I just love this whole thing. So thanks again, Mark, for having us here. I think Carlee covered it. We have the open call. That gets the bulk of our applications for sure. And then we do the hand select. And then we do referrals as well. That we'll take those into consideration. Usually those referrals then have to apply. So we still want that to be as neutral as possible. And actually what would hurt an application is if they try to say, oh, so-and-so told me I should be a TEDx, like one of the committee members, because that'll automatically take us out of voting. So we'll just abstain from that person. So it's another thing. We're just trying to be very democratic. We're trying to be as neutral as possible, unbiased as possible. But that's a process pretty much, yeah.
Very cool. Well, thank you all for that. Carlee, I thought it was interesting that you brought up the part of the process being essentially blind, which I remember some of you explaining to me before, where you don't have names or gender or anything attached to the applications once it's stripped down like that, which is really interesting and I think a fantastic way to do it. But I know even that can pose its own challenges. I remember the year that I was on stage host at TEDxSalem 2017, that year, between who chose to apply and who chose to be selected blindly, it was all female speakers except for Jerry Braza. And that's very unusual, especially because we were just talking earlier about the fact that with applications and such, it's quite often the opposite. Like Brian Smith was saying, all the guys constantly wanting to just jump in and be jumping into the speaking roles. So it's interesting how, like you said, Brian Hart, how these are different, but there are a couple of similarities for sure. And Michelle, did you have something to add?
Just one thing to add, since we also do salon events, the much smaller, more topic focused, fewer speakers, just a few hours kind of events. We use a guest curator for those. So we do a completely separate process, completely different, where we usually choose one of our alumni TEDx speakers and let them choose the theme, the speakers, they host it, the whole thing. And our team just runs the logistics. So we found that that's really fun for us to do it that way also, to do the guest curator model for the salon events. So we did do it in the early year. We did it for a couple of our big events where a former speaker would curate an entire session, and that was fun too, but we find it really works well for salons.
Yeah, very cool. Yeah, I remember being a part of one or two where one portion of the large event was curated by a past speaker, and that's interesting. It definitely changes things up in a completely different way. Very cool. So all of this has largely been about getting to the TEDx stage, which is something a lot of people do, but that, all of us know, is only part of the battle. Once you get accepted to be speaking at an event, the prep can be kind of crazy. A lot of you have a speaker concierge who is connecting with each given speaker and helping get them coaching and things like that. So this time around, I want to ask all of you, then once someone gets to the stage, how do they rock it? So what are 3 tips that each of you have first that you would give a speaker to help them just knock it out of the park when they're on a TEDx stage? So we're going to jump to Brian Smith this time. We'll start off with you. What are your 3 tips?
So we eventually prepared a document that we sent out to every one of our speakers to help them with this issue, because this is a speech unlike any other speech that you give in your life. So it's a lot of people, when they give a presentation at work or something, they make it the PowerPoint the night before or an hour before the meeting, and they're trying furiously to get their points across. The number one thing is you have to rehearse and you have to get everything handled ahead of time. We would actually have a series of speaker trainings that we would do, but we had all of our first presentation from all of our speakers about a month or 6 weeks after they got selected. So we invited them to give their first 2 minutes of their talk, which really told us how they were prepared, how they, what their topic was, what resonated. Inevitably, we would have 1 or 2 speakers that would go through their first 2 minutes, and at the very end, the last 5 seconds, they gave this amazing sentiment, this amazing little bit of their speech that should have gone at the front. And so everybody in the room all of a sudden would go, oh, that's the thing that you need to talk about. So really having getting feedback is important. Being prepared is important, and also being prepared ahead of time, and then giving yourself at least 30 days to rehearse. I did a TEDx or a TED Active talk in 2014, and it was 2 minutes and 45 seconds. I rehearsed every day for 6 weeks. So even though it was a very short talk, it took a lot of effort and a lot of time to make sure that everything was ready. The rehearsal time is important because it gives you comfort with what you're doing. We're always talking about something that's kind of close to our hearts and what we do in our lives, and whether it's a personal experience or our area of expertise or whatever. So I encourage people to write that draft, rehearse it, practice it, but don't memorize it. Mark, I know you tend to memorize things a little bit more closely than other people do. My recommendation for people is always, this is something that's important to you, but it's also something close to you. So you will pick up where you need to, and even if you forget a point, nobody else in the audience knows that you've forgotten that point. But to kind of enhance that emphasis on preparation, rehearsal, we would make all of our speakers turn in their visual files. So any PowerPoints, anything like that, 30 days before the event. I knew if they were doing this, if they were ready with their PowerPoint slides 30 days before the event, then that gave them enough time just to rehearse and to get this thing down, so that they would be able to just give a really fantastic talk that everybody would feel had impact.
Very cool. Thanks. Let's switch to the other Brian Hart. What are your 3 tips for rocking the TEDx stage once you're on it?
Great. Thank you. And thanks, Brian, for sharing those. So my 3 tips, the first one is actually going to sound a little counterintuitive, but I want everybody that is thinking about giving a TED Talk to ask themselves a real honest question, and that is, do they really have an idea we're spreading, or are they in love with just being a TED speaker? Because there's a big difference, and we usually can weed those out pretty quickly on our application process. That's how we get rid of most of the boys, because we do get a majority of males definitely apply. Not everybody has a TED Talk, and that's totally fine. And it doesn't mean you don't have value in what you do, but TED Talks are different. There's great business seminars and forums all over the world, but TED's just a little bit different. So first, just ask yourself, do I really have a TED Talk, or is it something different? And a lot of times we'll tell people, this sounds really interesting, but it's just not a TED Talk, and so we don't select them. The second one, I think, echoing already what Brian said, and I bet you everybody's going to say, is prepare. This isn't, and this is especially important for people that are professional speakers. They don't think they have to prepare as much. It's the opposite. This is supposed to be the talk of your life. This is, the pinnacle. You need to practice a lot. And I like how Brian said, don't memorize, or have it 100% memorized. We kind of actually we used to think memorize, and then we think, oh, don't memorize. We've shifted a lot, and kind of our current thoughts on prepping is to do what is best for you. Some people will be comfortable on stage to have it memorized, and some people will be more comfortable on stage to have bullet points memorized, but still kind of shoot from the hip and speak from the heart. We will caution that if you memorize, it has to not look like or sound like a memorized talk. It's almost harder because you have to live it and breathe it. And if it sounds memorized, it's not quite there yet. We work with our speakers we try to work with them about 6 months ahead of time to start the process. And since our event is usually at the beginning of the year, there's, Thanksgiving and holiday seasons in November, December, so that it doesn't make it quite 6 months because people are quite busy. The third tip would be to, first of all, read Chris Anderson's book on how to give a TED Talk, because he's the the main guy of Big TED, and he knows what he's talking about, and everybody jumps in from Big TED. And that's a really good starting point, and talks about the differences and how they're different talks and what's important. And also to listen to your coaches, to your liaisons, whatever they're called, that's on your specific TEDx team. These are people that live it and breathe it and usually have tons of experience. And again, even if you're a professional speaker, that's where we do notice some pushback. Like, look, I've been doing this for years, but TED Talks are different. So just to be very open, we have always found that the best speakers are the ones that can take feedback and criticism and use it to their advantage, and it just makes their talk better. Everybody on our team is always trying to make that speaker deliver the best talk they ever have in their entire life. So we're all on the same team. We're trying to help everybody out. So those are my 3 tips.
Very cool. I think that that's very important that you mentioned that this isn't easy even for professional speakers sometimes. And I think it's also important to note that speaking is not speaking is not speaking. There are lots of different career paths that someone might already be involved in that involve speaking in some way, whether it's delivering content online via lesson videos or podcasts or something like that. And that does not necessarily mean that all of those skills cover all of the skills you require on a stage in a situation where you can hear a pin drop because everybody is listening and there are video cameras going, and you know that maybe 700 people are going to hear this today, but over a period of time, thousands of people could see this online. That's an entirely different kind of pressure. On top of that, you have a confidence monitor maybe showing you what's on the slide behind you or the next slide coming, and you have a countdown clock in some situations, so you're under the gun. That changes everything. So even if you are working at a job where you're in a managerial role and you do some training, or like I said, doing anything else online, that doesn't necessarily mean that your speaking at a TEDx is going to be a cakewalk. That prep is so important. Michelle, I'm going to just mix things up and move to you. What are your 3 tips?
Yeah, Brian and Brian have given great tips already. I absolutely echo the rehearsing thing. A couple of things that what you just said, Mark, made me think of is that, I mean, yes, trust your TEDx planning team. They have been through this. They've seen this a lot of times. They are giving good advice. So do what they say, even if that's not naturally how you function in the world. It is not how I naturally function in the world. And every rehearsal that Carlee and Brian had me go through, all of which are videotaped, I sat and tried to take all of the feedback everybody gave me and integrate it. So, and I am not normally one who's like, oh yeah, tell me all the things I'm doing wrong. But this is the time for that. And so I would also add that find other ways to rehearse in as realistic like situations as possible as you're doing the early rehearsals up to the point of getting it all the way memorized. And I like Brian Smith's comment in the chat about getting beyond memorization, because that's where it starts to feel natural. We put our speakers through as realistic as possible rehearsals. We put them on a little stage. We sit our whole team in front of them. We videotape it. We put a confidence monitor and a countdown clock. We make them show their slides. And then we rip the thing apart and tell them all of the things that we think could be better. And guaranteed their talks are better afterwards. When I gave my TEDxSalem talk, I practiced in front of the Toastmasters group. They gave me lots of feedback. I also filled the room here at Wayfinding with about 45 people, and I said, tell me everything I'm doing wrong. So I'd say practice in those conditions as much as you can while you're still working out the final script that you're going to use. The other 2 pieces of advice, one of which I'm totally stealing from our current onstage host of our event, Jefferson Smith. He gets together with all of our speakers before they do their final rehearsal with us. And he says that to understand that no matter what else you've done in your life, this is probably going to be the best produced event you've ever spoken at. Understand that there will be 3, 4, 5 video cameras, the professional lighting, professional sound. You're going to look and sound the best you've ever sounded when you've given a talk. So don't waste that opportunity, because you may not get it again. So he really emphasizes that, because I think a lot of speakers aren't necessarily prepared for that. And I guess, so I would add that at least for our team, we similarly look for what's a really solid idea. Sometimes we prefer speakers who have a really good idea, who have never done public speaking before at all, ever in their life. That we can work with. We can't give you an idea worth spreading. Like, we can't help you create that. That's got to come from you. But what we can do is, we had a speaker, so in 2018, she's never given a talk at all to any size audience at all whatsoever in her life, ever. And her idea was about, she had created this type of microbe that eats plastics. And she was a college student at Reed College here. And we heard about her, we talked to her, we invited her to speak. And we coached her and coached her and coached her and coached her. And she did the rehearsal and we ripped it to shreds. And she literally left, she was crying, but was open to feedback and wanted this to be the best possible talk. And she took all the feedback and she was fantastic. And she listened to her concierge and she was so good. And she kept showing up. And then she came back for 2 more rehearsals. And on the day of the event, she was amazing. She spoke in front of like 500 people. She's never done that before, was unfreaking believable. And her talk is now one of the very, 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 very small percentage of talks that got chosen for TED.com for their platform. And she'd never done it before, but she had an idea worth spreading. So I would say that, like, a background in public speaking, as we've heard from a couple of other folks, may actually be a detriment. And it is very important to have an idea worth spreading. Can I add one tip that's for after the stage, like rocking it after the stage,
Please.
which is, and I learned this, I think, years into it. I didn't used to give this advice at the beginning, but we now tell all of our speakers to be okay being known as that person, right? So she now has to be comfortable being known as like the gal who talks about microbes eating plastics for a decade or more of her life. We had a talk at the very beginning, Joe Smith, on how to use a paper towel. It's a 4-minute talk. He's now the paper towel guy it's been 9 years, and that's what people know him as. So like, when you choose this thing, know that that's what you're getting into, because afterwards, this is going to be the thing you're known as. And when people Google you and when people look you up. And so have an after the talk plan too. So like, plan to share it with your networks, plan to share it on your social media, plan to have any organizations that you're with or things like that, spread the word about the talk if you want to get more views. So have an after the talk plan also, because I think that's the thing that we often overlook. Like, the TEDx teams can do some to help more people see your talk online later, but a lot of that's up to the speaker and their networks. So I would suggest like going into that with open eyes and having a plan for that too.
Oh, very cool. I mean, if it is an idea worth spreading that you're bringing to the table, you should be pumped to be spreading it once you have this amazingly produced version of it, like you were saying. And I think that you bringing that up, that Jefferson says that this is probably the most well-produced thing you will have ever done, is really important, because that thing will be put online. Chances are you won't get any chance to do any sort of editing, because the team is working on dozens of these to try to get them online. And when that thing does go live, it's not on your personal YouTube channel. It's on a TEDx channel somewhere. You as the speaker don't get to do anything with it. So you want to be so prepared that you're proud of that thing, because a bad TEDx video that's getting a bunch of eyeballs on it is not the sort of thing that you're able to somehow brush under the carpet and get to disappear. So that echoed idea of preparation, I think, is so important, because it is going to be absolutely phenomenal, and you want to not be the weak link in that when it's all said and done. Carlee, your 3 tips, please.
It's my turn. I'm going to sound like a broken record, because the top tip is to prepare. I mean, we all say it because it is that important. So I won't belabor that one. Just trust my fellow peoples. I actually, my other 2 tips might seem a little interesting, but one of them is edit. people get very attached to their words and the idea of like, well, I have 18 minutes to do this thing. With TEDxSalem, we actually assigned times to our speakers, and no one ever got 18 minutes. So one of the things is that, you know, like you start out with this talk that's potentially long, and then it's a matter of editing. And this is where it is good to work with us, with our coaches, but also our whole team. Each person has a coach, and then our whole team would offer feedback as well, and really be willing to edit, because it's better to have that one strong sentence than a whole paragraph that you lose people with. And that's something that's really important going into it, is being willing to edit and looking at it as, if you can get your point across in the shorter amount of time, it will probably get seen by more people, because, you know, online nowadays, attention spans, there are a lot of talks out there. There's a lot of content out there. And for your talk to be found and seen and heard, we're fighting for space in the world. And then my other tip is actually on clothing. So often speakers will get up on, like, I mean, they're like, okay, what do I wear? And, you know, we give recommendations of, okay, like, here's things not to wear, and, you know, like things to watch out for because of what's going to show up well on video and that. And we sometimes have speakers who decide that they're going to try a new outfit, and they show up on stage wearing a new outfit and they're not comfortable in it. And it comes across, because part of like what you wear is your level of comfort and like what you feel confident in. And, you know, for people that aren't used to wearing suits, and then they decide to wear a suit, and then they're just like, I don't know what to do. I don't know where to put my arms, or trying to put hands in pockets, or this or that. So I think it's really important to think about what you're going to be wearing on stage. Knowing, like, we tell all our speakers, because we do have a art installation in the background and then different lighting and that, we make sure all our speakers know, here's the setting that you're working with, and then, like, let us know, what are you thinking about wearing? And, like, we're here to help you wear the right thing. Like, tell us what you're thinking, and we'll tell you, know, if you're comfortable in it, like, we can decide whether it works well on camera or that. And then just, you know, because you want to, as you're giving the talk that is the best talk in your life, you want to feel the best about it. And I think, no one's told me this, but I think we've had a few speakers that, because they felt awkward in what they were wearing, they're not necessarily sharing their talks after, because they're like, oh, this wasn't, you know, like, I don't like how I look or something. So it's important that practicing, as you prepare and you practice your talk, like, put on your clothes that you want to wear, or you're thinking about wearing, and be comfortable in them, and be used to wearing them, so that when you get up there, you're not suddenly like, I have no idea, you know, I'm stuck in static, or I'm wearing a dress and I never wear dresses, or I don't do suits and that. So yeah, think about clothing.
Very cool. Solid colors. Don't wear the shirt I'm wearing right now if you're being videoed on stage. Just realize that would not be smart. Very cool.
Also, don't wear all black.
Yeah, exactly. Don't wear black either.
End up being a floating head.
The black background with the black clothes. It just looks like you're floating around on one big green screen or something. The third question I would like to ask everyone is just, what one thing you wish every speaker knew about the TEDx experience? Someone who wants to their aim is to hit the TEDx stage. What's something that you wish everyone knew about it? And we will start this time with Brian Hart.
It's harder than you think. That's my simple piece of advice, but it's important. So that's it.
Very cool. Super succinct. We will jump to Michelle. What is your one thing you wish every speaker knew?
And this is something that, now having done a talk myself, but I had heard this for years from our speakers, is that there's an emotional process you go through when you're preparing to give this talk and giving this talk. So I think I would want them to know to prepare for that, to prepare for the emotional element of this, as well as the practical rehearsal element. Because it makes you really think deeply about your purpose in the world and your life's work, and how you want to convey that, and what matters about that work.
Very cool. I can completely agree with the emotional process. Michelle has maybe heard this story, but when I did my first talk at TEDx Concordia U Portland in 2012, it was extremely intense for me. And I've had so much respect for the organization for years prior to that, watching the videos online, and it never occurred to me that it might ever be something that I ended up doing for myself. Their event did not have an application process. It was curated, so I was asked to do it. It was not something that I intended at the beginning of that year to be doing in a couple of months. And when I was able to get myself on stage, give this talk in front of probably 700 people at Concordia University there, and I very well remember walking off the side of the stage, getting the little microphone that was taped on the side of my head off, and I went shooting out behind the scenes and ran into a couple of people who I knew who were leaving. They'd hung out just through my talk, couldn't wait to get rid of them, and I walked the Concordia U campus and bawled my eyes out. And it was just because it was, again, something I never imagined I would do. It was extremely emotional. I just put everything I possibly could into being up there on that stage and holding myself together in an environment that was terrifying to me. I'd never before done that. And walking off that stage was just a complete release. I was finally done with it. I didn't care what or who else was coming up after me. I just had to get as far away from the space as I possibly could. And it can be extremely intense. You are completely right about that. Carlee, what is your one thing you wish every speaker knew?
Actually, my one thing actually is kind of an echo of Michelle for the after talk plan. My thought is that if you've gone and you've given your talk and you've aced it, then it really is promoting yourself or having a plan of getting your talk out there, because we are all volunteers and there's only so much time we have to dedicate to it. And as a team that we try, but it really takes it takes an army and it takes a team. And while we're advocates for all the talks that have been on our stage, we really need our speakers to be advocates for their talks as well.
Absolutely. Does take an army. That's awesome. Brian Smith, what is your one thing you wish every speaker knew about the TEDx experience?
The breadth of TEDx is very, very wide and variable. So there are some events that are run very professionally, and others are by people who are just getting started. They don't have all their infrastructure in place, and they don't really have the speaker support that you might expect. For ours, it was a 6-month process. So from the time you got selected to the time you hit the stage, there was a lot of training that went on, but you also need to expect variable results at the end. I keep track of our speakers' views on YouTube. I have some that after 4 years still have fewer than 200 views. Other ones have had hundreds of thousands. I have one speaker that was also promoted to the TED.com website and has over 3 million views. So there's a huge variety in the experience, but also in what you get after it. I mean, if you're the type of person that's thinking, this is going to launch my career and I'm going to have, book deals, and I'm going to have all these things happen for me afterwards, your expectations may not be in line with what happens afterwards. But the biggest thing is that the people in that room on that day, they're really rooting for you. They want you to succeed. They want to hear a great talk. So just kind of make sure that you're in that, remember that you're in that space with those people, and that you really got to connect with them to give them something that's worthwhile. Because ultimately, a TEDx talk is not about the speaker. It's about everybody who listens to it.
Very cool. Yeah, I think that's very important to be speaking to the people in the room. You have to be, I think as you put a talk of this nature together, you do need to be aware of the fact that it is going to be viewable later, and that can affect what you do or say on stage, because there might be things you might refer to another speaker or something like that, who later on someone on YouTube is going to have no understanding of what you're referring to. So you have to make sure to keep that that in mind. And just like writing, it's important to have one person in mind that you're writing to. And I think that's really important. Along those same lines, I think it's also very important. The thing I often tell wannabe TEDx speakers when I talk to them is that it's also important that idea worth spreading is only one idea. Because all of us have heard speakers come to those first practice sessions and they're amazing, but they have 30 different things that they're trying to shove into this talk. So I'm always telling anybody who aspires to be on a TEDx stage that if this is something you feel you really want to do and you do feel like you have an idea worth spreading, whittle it down to one thing. Some events, like Carlee mentioned, maybe don't give 18 minutes. I know Michelle has done that a lot in the past where one person will get 12, someone gets 8, someone gets 18, and they mix that up because it makes for an interesting day for the attendees who are there. Things are constantly changed up. And don't assume that because you're only sharing that one idea, that it's the only opportunity you'll have to do it. If you have 30 ideas, turn those into 30 really powerful talks and either pitch those different places. Maybe some will end up on a TEDx stage, maybe some won't, but you can use each of those in a little bit more of a smaller, more powerful capsule rather than trying to go, oh my gosh, I'm speaking on a TEDx stage. I have to take my entire life's history and shove into this little 15-minute block and try to share all of my wisdom. So it's really important to speak to who's in the room and kind of whittle those ideas down. We are very close to an hour, so I'm going to wrap things up because I want to make sure to keep on track here. But thank you to all 4 of you for taking the time to do this. Michelle, the Bryans, Carlee, this is super, super cool. And for attendees, when you are logging out, you will be redirected to a page that will give you information give you some links that you can get more information on what all 4 of these fantastic people are up to, some of their websites, Michelle's talk, and a little bit of social media as well. So I super appreciate you all taking the time to hang out with us today. It's awesome. And I will see you later.
Thanks for having us, Mark.
Thanks, Mark.
Bye.
Bye.